Welcome to NFL Daily, where we just learned there's another playoff P. I'm Gregg Rosenthal here with my friend Nick Shook from across the country, who wrote a fantastic article last weekend about players at the Crossroads. We're going to talk about that later in the show, but before that, we're going to do some news, including, yes, playoff P, Germaine Pratt being released. That's where we're leading the show here on this June 9th.
I mean, I don't have a problem with it. It is news. It did just happen, which is great for us, but I don't think I can get behind the whole nickname idea.
No.
I mean, I'm sure you got to come up with a nickname in key moments, and that's fine during a special run, but that one didn't stick in this brain, I'll tell you that.
I did not know that was a thing. Podcast P, playoff P, Paul George was more known for it. Hasn't really worn well on him. We're not really going to start with Germaine Pratt, but that literally happened just as we were going to start taping, and I'm distracted by it. But we will do a big release, Jaire Alexander. We'll talk a little bit about a signing, Nick Chubb, and some other stuff with mini camps starting. Yes, most of the league is starting their mandatory mini camps on Tuesday this week. I believe the Patriots are starting on Monday. There are only 5 teams that will still be practicing next week. So most of the league will wrap up their offseason program this week. The Lions are already out of there, so salute to them. But yeah, let's start with Jaire Alexander, since that happened Monday morning. A surprising end to that mini drama, because he was supposed to get cut in February. He was supposed to get cut or traded in March. It never happened. He was supposed to get traded around the draft. That never happened. Then afterwards, we heard, I guess they realized they could use a Jaire Alexander. They're not really very healthy. And we heard that there was a restructured contract offered just a week ago. Jaire Alexander, of course, one of the core pieces of this Brian Gutekunst era, literally his first ever draft pick, and has been there a long time. And then we get the news on Monday morning, he is cut. He will be a free agent. They couldn't work out a deal. Like, what were your thoughts initially?
I think it's a matter of availability. It's not that he's not still a good player. It's just that he's been so hit or miss in terms of being able to be on the field over the last few years. Like, since the beginning of the 2021 season, he's missed 34 of 68 games. That's mental math. That's half of the games. One of your best abilities is availability. And for a guy that had signed a 4-year, $84 million extension in 2022, his last season in which he played a lot of games, he played 16 games and made the Pro Bowl. You can't be dedicating that amount of money to a guy who just hasn't been able to demonstrate that he can be on the field consistently for you. And I think that's the root of what's going on here, and how we got to this point was that, look, we have value in him, but is the value really worth trading him? And it's also timing. Can you trade him before the draft? Can you trade him during the draft? Can you get something for him in return? They waited it out. They tried to restructure. It sounds like he wasn't on board with that. It sounds like they couldn't come to terms with an agreement with that. And so ultimately that's why they end up going their separate ways.
Yeah, he was due to make $16 million in base salary this year. My guess is he has a feeling, his agent certainly does, that he can make more money in a different place than whatever the restructure offer was. You would assume that they've kind of canvassed the market. So just thinking about where Jaire Alexander could go, he had a famous moment, which he was suspended for. Still the most hilarious suspension in NFL history. Him doing the coin toss against the Carolina Panthers because he's from Carolina without permission from the team. And then they suspended him for it afterwards. I mean, I love the Jaire Alexander era in Green Bay. I love the experience in general. Actually, before we get to the possible teams, and I would say the Panthers would be one of them, let's actually go back to that fateful day late in 2023. Let's listen to Jaire at midfield.
So were you supposed to be a captain? Because the team announces the 3 game captains, and you were the 4th, and you called a toss. What happened there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's only suiting. I don't think Coach knew I was from Charlotte. So
you just did that on your own.
I mean, it was like the guys backed me up. So they knew I was from here.
They knew he was here. I think we have a second part of this. Of course, that was not him at midfield. That's him in the locker room afterwards explaining maybe our producer Eric Roberts' favorite clip ever. And so that's why he just had to get it into this show. Let's listen.
Did you realize you almost made a big mistake on the call, though?
What'd I do?
Well, you said we want to go on defense.
Yeah.
Which in theory they could have said, then you're electing to to kick off, which you would have lost the opportunity then to receive in the second half?
Yeah, no, I told them that I said I want our defense to be out there, and they all looked at me like I was crazy. I'm like, I mean, it's pretty simple what I said. Like, I want the defense to be out there. They like, you mean defer? I'm like, yeah, I guess.
He said that to you?
Yeah, he did.
The mic was on.
Oh, what? Yeah,
he heard you.
Oh, really? No, he was just like, defer? I was like, yeah. Everybody was like, yeah. Everybody was laughing. I'm like, what y'all laughing at? Like, it's pretty obvious what I'm asking for.
So did anyone say anything to you when you got back to the sideline?
Why would they?
That just gives you a little taste of cornerbacks. That they're just a little different. One of my favorite characters. Looking at some teams that could possibly go after me. Yeah, Carolina, they could certainly use a cornerback. Why not? I saw there's been a lot of connection there locally. The Dolphins are probably going to trade Jalen Ramsey sooner than later. He is not showing up to mandatory minicamp in Miami this week. They could certainly use some cornerbacks, so they came to mind for me. The Rams, who have been involved talking about Jalen Ramsey, maybe that's not a crazy move. I could see him fitting there. The Cowboys, same thing with Jalen Ramsey. The Ravens, he just seems like a Raven. And then I was trying to think if he had any connections around the league. Mike Pettin, his former defensive coordinator in Green Bay. Do you know where Mike Pettin is working these days, Nick Shook? I admit I did not, even though he's been there for 3 years. So I apologize to Mr. Pettin.
You know what? It's on the tip of my tongue, and it's not coming to me because when I think about Mike Pettin in the employment market, I just think about the year he took off to build a cabin after he got fired by the Browns.
Yes. He is with the Vikings. He is an assistant under Brian Flores. And so who knows? Actually, that wouldn't be that crazy of a signing either. They know how good Jaire Alexander could be, and I think they could use an outside cornerback. He could be an interesting boomer bust type of pickup for a team out there.
Yeah, I like all those candidates. I think Miami probably jumps out as the most just because they need a corner so bad because it seems like their days with Ramsey are numbered. It feels like they're going to part ways, and the only other cornerback they have on the roster that's of note is Storm Duck, who needed an entire preseason campaign last year to kind of push his name into the consciousness of the football world. So they could definitely use some help there, especially in a pivotal season for them.
Yeah, I am spending more time on Jaire Alexander than I expected today, but he is one of those guys. Cornerbacks have these careers, like really great cornerbacks. They're so inconsistent, especially, you know, he's had injuries, and so that's been a problem. But suddenly, sometimes, like a Jalen Ramsey, they will just pop up at age 29 where Jaire Alexander is, like a Stephon Gilmore, for instance, sign like a 1-year deal and end up getting a second-team All-Pro and being very vital to the team that they join. So I am interested to see where he's at. But Mark Murphy, one of the last things he'll do as the team president of the Packers, because I believe he is kicked out in a couple of weeks here because of the age requirement. He said the reality is the last 4 years for Jaire, it's been about half the games that he's been able to play. So we have been used to it. I mentioned Jalen Ramsey not showing up to minicamp. The Dolphins are one of the teams that get to work on Tuesday, so we'll just monitor that, but they obviously haven't found a home for him. Nick Chubb, though, your boy, found a home. He is joining the Houston Texans. Nick, thoughts on one of the best Browns of the last 20 years? Although the Browns are over-indexing in like great players that they've had over the last 20 years when you really think about it. But Nick Chubb is certainly one of them, and I'm sure you'll miss him in Cleveland. What do you think about the fit in Houston?
Let's go fit first, because this is a classic veteran looking for an opportunity to pursue a ring and not need to carry the load type of situation where you got Joe Mixon there. He's not the only running back on the depth chart. You've also got Dameon Pierce. They have rookie Woody Marks out of USC. But Chubb's fit makes sense in that he can be somebody that you hand it to, I don't know, 7 to 12 times a game if you want to really be run dependent and see what you get out of him. You don't need him to come back and be the star that the Browns hoped he was going to be when he came back from that knee injury last season in an abbreviated season that ended with a foot injury. Now on the Cleveland side, people here are mourning the loss of him, but this was inevitable. They threw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and at running back and are hoping something sticks with drafting Quinshon Judkins and Dylan Sampson. They have 1 million running backs. They've been cycling through 1 million running backs for the last few years, basically since Chubb got hurt. It's the end of an era, but it was an end that could be seen coming from 1,000 miles away. And you hope that he is healthier this time around and is able to make a difference for a team that we expect to contend.
Yeah, I think he's Joe Mixon insurance. You're betting on the person, not the film from a year ago, because he just did not look like he had even close to the amount of juice that he had before his injuries. But you're further away from him. You're thinking if anyone can overcome it, it's Chubb. And more importantly, maybe he's not even a 7 to 12 touch guy initially. He's just a guy that you have in the hopper and you get him as healthy as you can. And if Joe Mixon misses 3 or 4 games like he did last year, like he did a couple years ago with the Bengals, or if he can't finish a game, Chubb comes in there and you see what can happen as a high volume replacement. But one of the best guys and one of the best just pure runners that we've seen. So I hope that he can bounce back with a fun team. We will see. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, by the way, is showing up to mandatory minicamp this week. He has not been at OTAs and shot some fire at the Eagles, by the way, to the media, just saying that he felt disrespected by that trade, and he's ready to go. I love me some CD Deuce offseason story. I guess we'll talk Germaine Pratt, by the way, just quickly. A linebacker who's played a ton of snaps for the Bengals, stuck around on this team longer than I expected. I guess they were trying to get some sort of trade compensation out of him and just didn't want to bother. They will save $5.6 million in cap space by cutting him, Shook.
Yeah, I think that friend of the show, contributor to the show, Kevin Patra, said it best today when we saw the news, which is, we're in the part of the offseason right now where teams are cutting guys before you get to mandatory minicamp. And this felt like that when he had requested a trade earlier this offseason. You know, it's a career with the Bengals where he started a lot of games and he piled up a team best total in tackles last season. And yet it felt like there was also a little bit more to be achieved there. I think that defense as a whole struggled so much last year that his missed tackles were magnified. According to PFF, he had 20 missed tackles last season, which is a lot for a linebacker. But it felt like Anarumo's out. He's over in Indianapolis now. You got to move on. And it felt like Pratt maybe wasn't interested in a contract year in finding a fit in a new coordinator scheme, and he wanted a change of scenery. So now he's going to get one. Don't be surprised if the Colts at least pick up the phone and check him out because Lou Anarumo is there. And if they don't, I think he'll garner some interest because you don't just pile up 143 tackles out of nowhere. I think that production itself will garner some interest. We'll see what happens, though.
Yeah, he was not great the last couple of years. He was drafted in 2019. Friend of the show, Ollie Connolly, will go to his deathbed swearing that Germaine Pratt's like doing the dirty work role really opened up that defense in a meaningful way and is probably like a Lou Anarumo favorite. So I'm with you that he'll probably end up in Indianapolis. He made the interception on Derek Carr. That was Derek Carr's only playoff start, right? And they're driving. It'll be a memorable moment in Carr's career. Pratt picks him off in that playoff game and helps secure the victory for the Bengals. But they drafted Demetrius Knight. Second round pick was a surprise pick, and he's going to basically replace Pratt there. The cap space gives them more than $30 million in cap space. You figure that is more than enough to get Trey Hendrickson signed. So it's more about the cash. And with them going over $30 million now, and the Packers going way over $30 million in cap space now, both those teams are in the top 10 or so in cap space. But I'm doing the math as I'm looking at it. And I think there's like 12, 13 teams with $30 million in cap space. And it goes back to what I say a lot in the offseason, like cap space is overrated. It's too easy. It's the opposite of where the NBA is at right now. Like the cap is just not that huge of an issue for a lot of the league if you've got $30 million in cap space. Maybe I'm a dummy by saying this, but like I don't think it's that big of an issue if everyone's got $30 million in room. Like in the NBA, everyone's spending over getting to it.
Yeah, I mean, there's too many ways to finesse the cap right now in the NFL that we get to this point. Like the Browns should have no cap space. They have cap space. Like there's a number of teams that should be in the red, and yet they could be the Saints were notorious for being close to 100 million over in cap projected going into an offseason and always find a way to get under the cap. So yeah, I agree. It is overrated, but it is interesting because this has been a very expensive offseason for the Bengals, in the extensions that they handed out. And that was a big sticking point with the whole Hendrickson thing. So now even $5.8 million gets you over that 30 million mark. And suddenly, you know what? We have some leeway where if we want to keep Hendrickson, we could front load a contract and get him paid right now and make him happy and find a way to make this work.
And they are saving not just cap space here. They are saving 5.6 in cash. It's one of those deals where it's just like they're just getting him off the books. And yeah, I mentioned that almost half the league is over 30 million. Only 3 teams are even under 10 million. And so they got to figure some stuff out, when they've signed some of the rookies. The Falcons, the Giants, and Bills are all 5 million or under. But other than that, like everyone has plenty of room. By the way, the Bills were mentioned. The Bills were mentioned as a potential Jaire Alexander landing
that,
spot.
yeah.
There were some conversations there, but that might have been before the draft. I wouldn't be surprised. We're hearing these reports this time of year of like what almost happened, and that was one of them.
Well, we're also getting that part of the season where like the veterans, you're getting some late additions to the free agent market. You're also got the veterans who are continuing to wait out the market. So we'll see some activity. I think once you get past mandatory minicamp and you kind of understand where you are as a roster and where you need to improve and who maybe might not make the cut even now, then you start to explore those options. But I do have to say this, Greg, when you mentioned Derek Carr's lone playoff start, I thought, didn't the Raiders make the playoffs in 2016? Who was their quarterback? So I looked it up. Take a guess who their quarterback was in their playoff loss in the 2016 season.
Well, it's embarrassing if I can't remember Matt McGloin because I was at the game. Did he come in or was he the starter?
The starter in that game
Yes.
was Michigan State's Connor Cook.
I can't believe I forgot that. I was literally there. Jadeveon Clowney, his crowning moment as a Houston Texan, dominated that game. Nice home playoff win for the Texans. Let's take a quick break. And by the way, before we do, I just did want to mention, we're mentioning these possible trades. I mentioned the Rashad Bateman contract in the last show. There was a report from Jeremy Fowler that he actually, asked for a raise. They didn't want to give it to him. They said, go check your value across the league, almost testing him like, yeah, you think you can get a contract? Go look around. And there were multiple teams that were like, yeah, we'd love to trade for Rashad Bateman. And then the Ravens were like, oh, actually, we don't want to do that. But apparently the Packers and the Patriots were both in on a Rashad Bateman trade. I believe that would have been before the draft. And so that is a sliding doors moment. But that was one of those situations where him and his agent called their bluff. He actually did have some value. And they were like, no, man, we actually love you, Rashad Bateman. We're going to find a way to keep you. And they worked it out. And
they spent 2 years pumping him up before he finally produced last year. So you better stick with him.
Why not stick with him? And then, of course, the Packers take Matthew Golden in the draft. And the Patriots get my boy, Kyle Williams. Let's take a quick break, and we're going to talk a little bit about your article. Nick, I'm going to throw in some players here. We'll do 5 players at the Crossroads right after this. Back on NFL Daily. Looking forward to a little drips and drabs of news this week before it gets real quiet. We have a big newsmaker on Tuesday, by the way, Shook. Ian Rappaport. Rap sheet.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Greg.
Yes.
We're going to talk about this Make or Breaks article that I wrote last week.
Yeah.
It's getting the most run of, I think, any article I've written in a long time. I did a segment with Ian on the Insiders about it on Friday.
Look at you. Big Shook pop in the offseason before you take a well-deserved break, I believe, in the middle of this week or into next week. So I'm looking forward for you for that. And let's talk about it. You said it's kind of a make or break season for a number of players around the NFL. You said players at the Crossroads. We'll do 5, and I'll let you get going. We'll go back and forth. Who do you find most intriguing about these players at the Crossroads?
I think when you look at this article and you scroll down, you see a name like Sam Darnold, you get confused, which, by the way, Crossroads, shout out to Bone Thugs and Harmony. But look, because Sam had a great year last year and everybody expected him to get paid. He gets paid by the Seahawks. We all know, what dominoes needed to fall in order to make that happen, including your boy Geno Smith getting traded to the Raiders, which is a win-win, right? But it is a risk because if Sam doesn't produce in year 1, they can get out of it. The way they've structured this contract, and we just talked about how cap space doesn't matter. Well, contracts often on face value don't matter either because of the way they're structured. The Seahawks, if they cut him after June 1st next year, they could save $27.5 million of his $33.9 million cap number in 2026. That's basically saying, all right, this didn't work out. We're moving on. They also drafted Jalen Milroe. Obviously, he's more of a runner than a passer, still needs time to develop. He's going to be on the field in packages at some point just because he's that dangerous of a runner. But the pressure is on, and it's on just as much for Sam as it was a year ago when he went to Minnesota and basically got the starting job because J.J. McCarthy got injured, and so there was no competition. And then he took advantage of it. He's going to have to capitalize again. It's crazy for a guy who has seen so many peaks and valleys in his career already and experienced such a significant peak last year that he's going to have to do it again under such pressure. But this is the NFL. So he is a guy who is going to have to deliver in order to retain his job beyond 1 year, no matter how big the contract was.
Yeah, you think about where he's at, and the comparisons to Geno Smith make a lot of sense in many ways in terms of career arc. But this is like that season that Geno had trying to follow up his breakout, where you can either cement yourself as a guy who is going to be starting in the NFL for the next handful of years, or you could kind of go back to being where you were before, which is this bridge guy. And you only have so many of those chances. And if it doesn't work for Darnold in what I think is a good setup, but certainly not as good a setup as Minnesota, then he's going to be typecast as a guy. It's like, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be that situation. He's going to be more of a 1B. I think what he did last year was guarantee that he's going to have a long career if he wants it. And he's going to get to start more games in his career than we probably expected going into last year. But he could go right back to Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, kind of late career Teddy Bridgewater mode, where he's not really viewed as a potential starter, where like if he plays like he did last year, like he's just gonna be a guy that we're talking about as a starting quarterback for the next like 5, 6, 7 years. He can really cement himself. All you really need to do is do that a couple times as a starter. And I'm gonna throw out a guy in a similar situation in terms of it could be his last year with his team. I'm going to say Kyler Murray. Like,
oh, I love this.
How many more years can we do this? Actually, how many players have been at the Crossroads more than Kyler Murray? I feel like he has a Crossroads year every 3 or 4. And I like that they have been patient with him, this new staff. But he's 28 years old. He has been in Arizona a long time, and he's been with this coaching staff shook for a long time. And how I would put it is that if he plays exactly the same as he did a year ago for Arizona, I think they will trade him in the offseason. Now, he's too talented not to be starting games out there, but they can save $35 million if they trade him next year. They would have only $17 million in dead cap. That's actually not that crazy to move off of a quarterback. Like it happens all the time. You can survive that. You're saving money ultimately. And so to me, I do think he needs to take a step forward for this Arizona team to remain the guy there long term.
Yeah, and it's crazy because his arc has kind of it coincides with the Jonathan Gannon era there, in which their first season was essentially a mulligan because he wasn't going to be able to come back healthy until late in the season. And he played well enough and they took steps forward that you're like, oh, okay. He's not like, he's been out of the game for a while. And yet look how much better we are with him. And then they went into last season and they had a strong start and they kind of, petered out at the end. And now we're at this point where you place him as one of those crossroads players because of that exact reason. I have 2 questions here because I can't imagine that you have an upgrade available right now that would actually convince you, unless the financial savings are just so attractive that it would sell you on moving him and just figuring it out elsewhere. But also, because of the amount of money that they're going to save in a move and everything else, it sounds like it could be an attractive trade option for another team. So, like, what kind of return do they get on him in this scenario? Because I think if you're only eating it's not a terrible amount of dead cap, but it's a movable contract at that point, or at least relatively, given that there's a number of teams that are desperate for a quarterback every year. So, like, what does he fetch if he has a season like last season? Because I could count a handful of teams right now that would take him in a trade.
Right. He is a much better option than Justin Fields or Aaron Rodgers, who will both be starting week 1. By the way, Aaron Rodgers' contract details came out. I didn't mean to hit that. He's making $10.5 guaranteed, $13 million in general, assuming he makes a team, and the incentives can go up to $19 million. I know it's a little bit of a sidebar, but what do you think about the fact that Aaron Rodgers is making less money than Daniel Jones this year?
Yeah, I got really excited when I saw that on the ticker on the TV at the gym the other day. I was just like, oh, we're at that point now where Rodgers is playing for less than $20 million. This is great. 2025, baby.
Way less. It's really a $13 million contract, but everyone trying to make the case that this is like a great deal. First of all, Daniel Jones, that bad contract should not be the barometer of what makes sense or not. It actually makes sense to me. I mean, the fact that Justin Fields is making a lot more money is surprising. And yet I think this is where Rodgers' play said he was worth. And it says a lot that the market didn't value him any better than that. And so I don't think he's like taking some discount. I just think this is the best that he can get. And there's just such a huge drop off from if you're actually a starter, like a Kyler Murray, who it's crazy, is where you don't want to be. And I'll get back to him now. Where you don't want to be is have the huge franchise quarterback contract, and they're all close enough to each other that there's actually not that big of a difference. But ultimately, Kyler Murray is close to the very end of the line in terms of quality play. Now, I'm always a defender. There was a good video that went out this weekend on YouTube. It's by Alex Rollins. I watched it, and it was kind of about how much Kyler Murray struggles with pressure. And you can change the numbers around. Like his EPA per play against pressure last year wasn't great, but the eye test and some other numbers aren't great. And so he is a guy who, if it's all working well, can be absolutely fantastic. If he's protected, he can be fantastic, but he just doesn't want to get hit. And that's not that huge of an issue if you're Peyton Manning and you're winning from the neck up and you can just get rid of the ball quickly, but that's not how Kyler Murray wins. So that combination is a problem, and I do think he's going to have to run more. He's talked about that, and I do think he's either got to develop knowing where everyone else is on the field more, or he's got to be a little more willing to take a hit, and that's tough to do at his size and his age.
Well, you talked about it at length last season where Kyler Murray doesn't know who he wants to be. Sometimes he wants to run more. Sometimes he wants to do the opposite. So I totally agree that he's probably going to need to run more. They were also, numbers aside, like not going to use any stats to back this, but just from the eye test alone, knowing what happened in their games last year, they were one of the worst third down teams that I can remember in a while. Like it was just drop back, blitz is coming, chuck a prayer, hope it works out. Oftentimes it's just throw the ball toward Marvin Harrison Jr. or somebody else and it didn't work out. So that needs to be fixed because like you have to sustain drives. So I totally agree with that. And I don't know if we'll ever see him get there.
Yeah, I still have hope because the great games are so great. It's funny, you look at his numbers, they're incredibly consistent. Like he's averaging 7 yards per attempt like his whole career. And like every year is right around there, but he gets to it in such an inconsistent way throughout a course of a season, throughout a course of a game. Like, a lot of this video referred to this second matchup against the Rams, which I remember really well. It was, it was on in primetime and they only scored 9 points. And I think about that dichotomy between that and the first Rams game a year ago where he looked like the best quarterback in the league and they put up a 40 burger. That's kind of the Kyler Murray experience. He fades at the end of the year. All right, let's go to your next player at a crossroads.
Yeah, it kind of makes me feel bad for holding Cliff Kingsbury accountable for them blowing a tire down the stretch so many times.
That's fair. It seems like a Kyler Murray thing to struggle down the stretch.
I may have some regrets. All right, another player that showed up on my list, Marshon Lattimore, cornerback for the Washington Commanders. We know that he was acquired mid-season last year as an upgrade for a Commanders team that surprised everybody. But it took him a while to get on the field and be available. And once they hit the playoffs, he was bad. Look at his PFF grades. They're in the red. They're bad. And so it's not that he's at a crossroads that he is necessarily playing for a contract because he does have another year on that contract. It's about earning that next year because at 29 years old, you hope that he's got the off season to kind of, understand where he fits in Dan Quinn's defense more and gets, more familiar with his surroundings with Washington. But he's going to have to be better than that because even as somebody that was traded for in the middle of the season, they expect more out of him than what they've gotten out of him so far, especially in clutch games like that. So if he's going to get to 2026 in his contract, he's going to have to play much better. And even if he's not going to get to 2026 in that contract, he's still going to have to play better to earn money elsewhere because he's at that age right now where he's only got one more opportunity to cash in on a significant deal outside of the 1-year deals that you mentioned that guys like Stephon Gilmore or Jalen Ramsey end up getting at that point in their career. So it's a pivotal season for him in a number of different areas.
Yeah, I think of him and Jaire Alexander very similarly. Like they came into the league at 21 years old, a lot of early success. Jaire has made 2 second-team All-Pros. Lattimore's made 4 Pro Bowls, but man, you see how these cornerback careers go. I just said it with Alexander too. Like you can have a pop-up season late in your career, and I think Lattimore started 2023 looking like he's looked, but he's missed at least 7 games per year over the last 3 years. This is a guy who his colleagues were rating top 100 player in the NFL 5 times. He was one of those guys, and yet, man, he could be a negative for this team. So I love that one because he was a guy I thought was going to have just a fantastic career. They drafted Trey Amos. Like, who knows what they're going to get? They might get something great out of him. They might get something terrible. He was one of the guys I was thinking about talking about too. So good pick, I guess, but you stole it. I'm going to go DeAndre Swift, who is on your list. So another player out of Crossroads who probably wouldn't be the starter for Chicago if they had gotten their wish and drafted Travion Henderson. I think they wanted him in the draft. It didn't happen. Instead, they wind up with Luther Burden because the Patriots get Henderson. And Burton, by the way, has not been practicing at all with a soft tissue injury. So that's not a good start to the offseason for him. But I checked, Shooky. Only 9 running backs. This is kind of a weird way to do it, but only 9 running backs have at least 900 yards from scrimmage over the last 3 straight years. And DeAndre Swift is one of them. And there were moments in that Philadelphia season, certainly, and even with this season in Ben Johnson, where he runs really tough. And I think he's a little better at his best than people give him credit for, but he's really been scheme dependent. He's now in this great situation, and he could definitely pop off and have a big time year, or he could be someone that kind of drags this Bears offense down.
Yeah, I agree that I think that he's unfairly criticized and undervalued often. And I think about that Eagles season where I was like, look at him, he's back on the horse now. He's proving his worth. And I thought he was going to be a great fit in Chicago. But I caution about the heightened expectations under Ben Johnson. You look at Detroit's offense, you see David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, and they're doing so well in this offense and everything else. They're there because the Lions didn't want DeAndre Swift anymore. They let him go to Philadelphia and rebuilt their backfield in a move that I think shocked a lot of people at the time, but made a lot of sense in hindsight. And there's a reason for it. In his last season, he ran for 542 yards and 5 touchdowns. Under Ben Johnson before leaving for the Eagles. I'm a little concerned that this doesn't actually work out, which is a big reason why I put him at the crossroads. He's going to have to prove that he's not scheme dependent, that he can work well in Ben Johnson's offense in order to keep himself, basically prove his worth to the Bears.
Yeah, he caught a ton of passes that year, did not get a ton of carries. And so you might see that play out with Chicago, that he is a little bit more of a receiving back for the Bears. Last thing on, I know I'm jumping all around, but I did want to mention the Packers are a team that is like looking to make the Super Bowl right now, and their best cornerbacks are Keyshawn Nixon and Carrington Valentine. So I do think could they be a Jalen Ramsey team? I don't know. Like, that could be a big time weakness for this team is their cornerback position, if that's their top 2 cornerbacks. Yeah, just wanted to make that point before we go.
I think that's a great point to make, because when all this stuff started months ago, which this feels like it's been an ongoing saga since like January, if you looked at their depth chart, that's the first takeaway I had too, was, well, who do you have behind him? Because Valentine was a guy that essentially was 4th in your depth chart, ended up working his way more into the rotation. But to have those as your top 2, I feel like that's a bit of a weakness on paper that you wouldn't want to expose yourself to going into this season, and especially if you could work something out with him. So yeah, I think that's a great point to make, and could be a problem for them this season.
I don't know about great. I'm going to go solid, because I can hear Brian Gutekunst and Packers fans saying, we just signed Nate Hobbs to huge money. But in my mind, I'm thinking about Nate Hobbs as a guy that's a slot cornerback. They say maybe he's going to play a little more on the outside. I'm thinking about outside cornerbacks. You need 3 of them. But yes, Nate Hobbs is a promising pickup for them. Not a guy who stayed on the field all the time either for the Raiders, by the way. All right, your final player at the crossroads, Shook.
My final player at the crossroads, I could cherry pick, and I could say Anthony Richardson, because especially with the news that he was going to miss the rest of offseason activities and be back at some point in camp, that, I could go there, but I'm not. I'm going to go with Chris Olave. Not because of his contract. This is not the last year of his deal. Not because of the talent. We know he's a talented player. It's because he can't stay on the field. We know that he's had multiple instances of concussions in his career. He's just constantly on the injury report and isn't available. And the thing is like, he had 2,000-yard seasons to start his career, and then he just played only 8 games last year. This is a Saints team that has been ravaged by injury at the receiver position over the last couple of years. They now lost their quarterback in Derek Carr. Tyler Shuck looks like the leading candidate to take that job, and doesn't inspire all the world's confidence in me right now, but he'd do a lot better if he had a guy like Olave on the field, and Olave would too, because I think this is more about reclaiming a promising career and proving that you can do it, and really just staying healthy. And oftentimes luck is so, unfortunate with guys who are talented like Olave, and just that you can't predict when you're going to get hurt and that sort of thing. But I would love to see him put together a full season again and prove that he's still the player that we remembered him coming out of Ohio State, because when he's at his best, he's a very good young receiver. And I would hate to see, that flame extinguished just because of health issues.
Oh, we got some pushback on socials that we had Olave too high in our top 30 wide receiver rankings that even made the list, but I think he was somewhere around 25.
And that's because he hasn't been available.
Yeah, if he's right, I think he's going to earn that spot and maybe even a little more, but clearly riskier than a lot of the players. And you just hope he can stay healthy so that he can get that big second contract. They did pick up the 5th-year option for Olave, so he is guaranteed around $15 million next year. But he is someone you just hope the best for, especially with those head injuries. That's a good call of a guy who they really need to come through, and I think he will be desperate to do so. And to me, it's more about the injuries and certainly the quarterback there. 5 players at the Crossroads. Shook, we're not saying goodbye to you for the rest of the offseason yet. I'll let the listeners know we have some plans coming up in future weeks, but I know you're taking off for a little bit. You'll be back with us in a couple weeks. You need a break, deserve it, and don't work too hard playing Madden and doing consulting or whatever you're doing for Madden.
I will be using this next week and a half to get some much needed R&R before we start to gear up for what is going to be another thrilling and exciting season.
Yes.
Year 2 of NFL Daily. Oh baby, here we go.
I know. And we have the date where we're going back to daily. Clearly, we have not been daily lately, but we're doing it a handful of times this week. We will have Ian Rappaport on the show next. I'm really looking forward to that and breaking down all the news stories around the league. Yeah, man, when we're like leading with Germaine Pratt, like football is not that back. I don't know.